The last time one of the big three hardware manufacturers released their next-gen console, it was in the middle of a pandemic. It led to the console's launch being confusing and frustrating.
Supply shortages, scalpers, online store waits and queues, obfuscated information, and more. It most certainly was confusing and frustrating.
Here we are 5 years later, and Nintendo is finally ready to release their next-generation system, the Switch 2. And the launch was...
Say it with us now. Confusing and frustrating.
Are all games backwards compatible?
Do Switch 2 editions have the new version on the cart?
Do Switch 2 cartridges for Switch 1 games run on Switch 1?
How much will Switch 2 edition upgrades cost?
Will there be enough consoles at launch, or another PS5-like shortage?
Will Joy-Con drift still be an issue?
Those were just a few questions we all had pre-launch, and for some reason Nintendo seemed hell-bent on not answering any of these questions. Well, luckily, it seems like most of those fears have evaporated.
Yeah, as the days to Switch 2's launch came nearer and nearer, more and more questions were answered, and now that we, along with many others, have gotten the console in our hands, most of these concerns have been addressed.
Seems like there's plenty of consoles in stores. Switch 2 cartridges of older games do work on Switch 1, and the backwards compatibility is quite impressive. Of course, there's still plenty of valid criticism. The C button is essentially locked behind Switch Online, and the launch library is incredibly weak in my opinion.
But it's also incredibly strong considering the Switch 1's catalog.
And we still don't really have a good answer on Joy-Con drift, but it looks like we're gonna be suffering with that problem still, which really sucks.
Do these make the Switch 2 a worthy upgrade? Well, it all really depends on your wants and needs. Right off the bat, I just want to say that the Switch 2 is a very sleek and attractive console. The overall black design is very modern, while still having that touch of Nintendo playfulness with the splashes of color dotted around. It's one that simply looks great sitting in your TV stand.
I gotta be honest, I'm technologically illiterate. I don't know much about what specific chips are in the Switch 2, and I've had the terms anti-aliasing and ray tracing explained to me more times than I'd like to count.
Oh my god, how many times do we have to go over this, Dylan?
Luckily, that's where JER is going to come in for this review.
And we will certainly get into all of that later, but let's start with the basics for now.
What I can give you is a layman's perspective. Somebody who has had 7.5 years of experience with the Switch 1 and a lifelong lover of all things gaming. The Switch 2 is pretty damn nice. I love the new magnetic Joy-Cons. They feel far more secure and precious than the old Joy-Cons.
And thankfully this seems to have mostly eliminated that awful loose wiggling problem they had on both the original and OLED models. And god are they satisfying to snap on.
There's something about that strong magnetic click that just makes them feel more high-tech, which means if I drop them or get drift on them, it's gonna piss me off even more than when drift happened on my first few Joy-Cons. The joysticks feel a bit flatter and wider, allowing for an easier grip.
And even though the movement feels a little softer than a PS5 or Xbox controller, they are a huge improvement over the prior pair. There's also various small improvements that go a long way, like the addition of an extra USB Type-C port on the top and an improved cartridge cover. And just in case you were wondering, yes, the cartridges are still just as bitter as ever.
Coming from the Switch 1, the kickstand on the Switch 2 is definitely an improvement.
Yeah, I don't know anyone that has kids and has the original model that doesn't have a broken kickstand.
I didn't actually have a Switch OLED unlike JER, and he told me it's a bit of a downgrade from the Switch OLED kickstand.
It certainly is. The thinner design feels like a step backwards from the OLED's more tablet-inspired kickstand, and I have some small worries about its longevity. If you're coming from the original Switch though, it's going to be a solid improvement, and the fact that it's made out of metal, unlike the back of the console which is a hard plastic, should give it a bit more durability.
Speaking of OLED, I know people were disappointed with the lack of an OLED screen, and I am too, but overall I love the new screen. Games can now hit up to 1080p, and some games can even get to 120 FPS while in handheld. I did a side-by-side comparison to Switch 1 on the same brightness level, and there's truly just no comparison. It doesn't matter if I was playing a new game like Mario Kart World or an older game like the Castlevania Dominus Collection. Everything just looked better on this screen.
Combining this new screen's implementation of HDR and Nintendo's first-party games being mostly bright and colorful, an OLED screen would mostly go unnoticed anyway.
Don't worry, OLED purists. Nintendo will definitely sell us an OLED model in 4 years after everyone already bought their first Switch 2. But hey, if Valve can do it with the Steam Deck, Nintendo can do it too. No double standards, please.
Considering Nintendo have given this LCD display variable refresh rate support, or VRR, it will be interesting to see if Nintendo opts to drop that VRR for an OLED, or if OLED technology can catch up in time to prevent the notorious flickering that occurs when combining the two technologies. Of course, this brings up one of those weird Nintendo being Nintendo decisions where the handheld display has VRR, but there's absolutely no support for it when docked. Okay, Nintendo.
From my experience, the download times didn't feel much faster, which is disappointing.
At least this time around, they've learned from the OLED dock and have brought back the Ethernet port in the Switch 2's dock for quicker speeds and less latency.
This is a little embarrassing to admit, but I don't care. I was so excited to get this console set up that I didn't even notice the Ethernet port, so I'm definitely going to be taking advantage of that. But as for the overall online experience, JER and I played a shit ton of Mario Kart Online, and I genuinely didn't notice a single second of lag or jitteriness. There was a couple of nights I hopped online with a bunch of strangers. Remember, in Mario Kart World, the maximum number of racers is 24. Most of my races had 24 people, and I genuinely didn't notice a moment of lag, stutters, or that classic online Nintendo jank.
It seems pretty solid so far for sure, and I have yet to have any issues either.
I will say a couple of days ago, I did get booted out of a private room with JER a couple of times, but that hasn't happened again. And I also wasn't home, so I wasn't on my own Wi-Fi, so that's probably part of the problem. Maybe Mario Kart World isn't the best game to test the online out, I'm not really sure. I remember playing 1v1 Smash Bros online on the Wii U and getting tons of issues. So thankfully, I just didn't see any of that here.
It'll definitely be interesting to see how more connection-dependent games fare. Maybe once Rocket League gets an update, I'll be able to see how good the console handles something a bit more intensive.
Again, maybe I just feel this way because I'm a technology clown, but seeing a game that relies on the internet connection of 24 people running perfectly, yeah, that's a pretty good first impression. Not everything is perfect though, the dock still feels incredibly cheap, including the back piece which just easily pops back on and off. I really do not understand why the docks are so expensive when they feel like this. This is some of the cheapest plastic I've ever felt in the last 10 years.
It honestly feels like a bit of a downgrade from the Switch OLED dock. I'm genuinely surprised that in all iterations of the dock, they still have not added any kind of microfiber padding on the inside to prevent scratching your screen. The dock is also still extremely lightweight and scoots around so easily when taking the console in and out. I mean, just look at the tiny pads they chose to put on the bottom for grip. I guess, once again, I'll be resorting to using painter's tape underneath to hold it in place.
The overall size of the Switch itself is quite nice for me. I wouldn't say I have huge hands or anything, and I actually thought the size of the Switch 1 was perfect. Luckily, the size of the Switch 2 doesn't quite hit the cumbersome level of the Steam Deck and other portable consoles. Whenever I play the Steam Deck on my couch, I feel like I need to prop a pillow on my stomach and put the Steam Deck on the pillow because it's so big and heavy. Luckily, I don't feel that way with the Switch 2.
It's one of those times where the size difference doesn't seem that significant in pictures, but when you're actually holding it in person, the difference is pretty noticeable. While I also thought the original Switch was the perfect size, I am starting to get used to the new console's heft, which does allow it to have that bigger 7.9-inch display.
I also messed around a bit with the new GameCube emulation, specifically a few rounds in Soul Calibur 2 just so I can play as my boy Link. I played it all in handheld mode and it really looks good and sounds good. I'm waiting for a few more games to release on it before I really sink my teeth in, like Chibi Robo, but from what I experienced, it really seems like a solid emulation.
Yeah, the emulation on these titles is honestly pretty great, all running at 60 FPS with the options to play in the original 4:3 or 16:9 widescreen aspect ratios. While it would have been nice to see them outputting at 4K, considering the Dolphin emulator has had this feature for a very long time, the 900p output is certainly a huge improvement over the GameCube's original 480p resolution. Overall, this is a solid start for the GameCube on the Switch, and I'm excited to see more games come to the collection. The only thing we really haven't been able to see much of so far is the Switch 2's main gimmick type of feature, mouse mode. Considering neither of us are going to spend $10 on that Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour game that really should have been a pack-in.
Where's Reggie when you need him? Reggie, please come back.
There really isn't much use for it yet. From just messing around with it on the main menu though, it seems pretty responsive, and the fact that you can just tilt the Joy-Con onto its side and it seamlessly transitions into mouse mode is really quite compelling.
All I've seen with the Switch 2 is nothing but pure potential. I've even read from multiple outlets that the new port of Cyberpunk 2077 is very impressive. And I know, it's a 5-year-old game. But so what? Red Dead Redemption 2 is a 7-year-old game, and it's still more impressive than 90% of AAA games that come out today.
And with Rockstar releasing Red Dead Redemption on the Switch, maybe we can hope to see Red Dead Redemption 2 make it to this console.
If Cyberpunk is running well on Switch 2, just imagine what Nintendo and their cartoony, less technologically demanding first-party games can offer us.
Truthfully, the power advantage of the Switch 2 alone was reason enough for me to pick one up. In fact, the very first thing I did after setup was try out the new Switch 2 versions of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom to see them in glorious 4K 60. And they are simply breathtaking, pun fully intended.
My biggest critique of the launch is the launch library. At first, I criticized Mario Kart World for being the star of the launch.
Say what you will about the launch lineup, but I think Mario Kart World is the perfect launch title for the Switch 2. It summarizes everything new about the console well, flaunting the faster load times, boasting 4K 60 when docked, really showing off the new chat system, and has all around nicely brought everyone together around this launch. But Dylan and I actually debated about this for a bit because he felt differently.
To be honest, this is nothing new for Nintendo. Just take a look at the Switch 1 and Wii U's launch library. And the Nintendo 64's launch was infamously slow. People got Pilot Wing 64 and Super Mario 64, and then they had to wait 4 months for the next big game, Mario Kart 64.
Yeah, looking back, I think most consoles had pretty weak launch lineups, but that's just how these things go. Console lineups get built up over time, and we can judge the launch all we want, but it's where they go with it that matters most.
I guess I'm just kinda confused why they didn't just get Donkey Kong Bonanza out for the launch since it's only a month away.
And I agree, having that big multiplayer experience, but also a solid single player game to go with it, feels like it would have helped this launch immensely.
My personal theory is maybe they wanted to give the Switch 2 two big pops back to back. June for the launch and Mario Kart World, July for Donkey Kong Bonanza. It's almost like having 2 launches for the console in 2 consecutive months. I've been telling all of my curious friends this. The Switch 2 is the perfect trust your gut moment. If your gut is telling you that there's not enough games and there's no reason to be excited for technology that's already a couple of years old, don't buy a Switch 2. Just don't buy it. But if your gut is saying you loved the Switch 1, but you're kind of getting tired of how weak it feels compared to your PS5 or Xbox Series, then yes, buy it. It's worth it.
And that's basically how I felt too. For me, it was an easy purchase because I've been asking for a Switch Pro for years at this point, and just the fact that it can serve that purpose and then some made it a no-brainer. For some though, the original Switch serves its purpose fine, but if you're looking for something that is more up to par with modern standards, then this console might be right for you.